All right, good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to a volume two of Nobody's Agent. If you were with us before, we talked about the facilitator role on side A of our mixtape here. And on side B today, we're going to talk about the North Dakota customer and what that looks like. So settle in, have a little bit of fun, and let's dive into kind of what we're looking at here. Now, the first thing I want to make sure that we talk about is the reality that what does this mean, the whole facilitator non-licensee role, right? And so this really comes down to the idea that people say, I don't want an agent, I just want to look at this house or I just want to buy this house. And what does that mean? And so we want to try to have some conversations. What does that mean to us? What do we owe this individual? What fiduciary obligations do we owe? Can we still get paid for these services? And does it matter when the house is in Moorhead or Fargo when we're crossing a state line? And the answer is it does. But one thing we've mentioned here is we want to make sure we're talking about it from a conduct perspective, right? So the conduct beats labels every single time. If we end up going to court with somebody, you're going to promise that we will, when the judge is asking, well, what did you guys do and how did you treat this individual? And we say, hey, here's all the things we did, here's how we communicated with them. The conduct of which we did there will beat the label every time. Implied agency is an actual thing in North Dakota as well. So we want to make sure that we're having this conversation in order to be in the best light possible here. So let's dive in a little bit here. In North Dakota state statutes, you can see them on the bottom. It's important to note that the word facilitator is not used in the great state of North Dakota. Facilitation is only a Minnesota statutorily default position when it comes to how you're representing somebody. In North Dakota, it does not exist. You are either an agent under a written agreement or a non-agent serving a customer. These are the big key differences when it comes to understanding what that is. So you are an agent with a written agreement, listing contract by a rep, or what we call a non-agent serving a customer. Okay, so at the end of the day, just as we teach in Minnesota, you have a contract, a representation agreement, they are a client where you are acting as an agent. Or you are servicing your customer and you are not acting as an agent. So these things matter and making sure that we get them taken care of. So let's dive in a little bit more and talk about what this can look like. So if we look at some of the vocabulary, and again, we speak from the Minnesota side to the North Dakota side, but here's how that may look. Again, so we say Minnesota is going to look like a facilitator role, meaning our fiduciary obligation is confidentiality only, right? Well, North Dakota is going to say you are a non-agent. You are not contractually obligated to be an agent to this person who's assisting a customer. We say, well, we're representing a person. North Dakota says, no, they are a client. There is a written agreement. Okay. We also then say, well, we have an unrepresented person, right? An unrepresented buyer, unrepresented seller. Well, they call that a customer in North Dakota. And oftentimes you'll hear it referred to that in Minnesota. A facilitator services agreement. So we have a facilitator services agreement with a menu of services that you can check in Minnesota. Well, North Dakota says, hey, we have a non-agency disclosure, which informs the individual that this is a non-agency relationship. And then lastly, we have fiduciary advocacy, meaning we have a default obligation to somebody under a confidentiality role. And North Dakota is going to say, well, we only have that if it is under, whoops, let me slide out of the way, if it is under a written agreement. Okay, so that's a little bit about the space and how those areas are going to look a little bit different. Now, I want to point out here just a little bit that our policy in North Dakota, forums, advertisements, conversations, if they say unrepresented customer, it's never a facilitator. The label won't save you if the conduct looks like it's actually in a different spot here. Let me see that slide out of the way so you can read that. There we go. So again, anything you're doing, whether it's forums, advertising, conversations, we're not facilitating a deal. We're working with an unrepresented customer, right? We're not facilitating a deal because, again, if we have an issue in North Dakota and we go to court, that's going to be the language that we're looking for to protect you, an unrepresented customer. Excuse me. So what a customer gets and what a customer don't get, all right? So here you go. So North Dakota side says we owe them 3 duties: customary assistance, meaning what the customer will get is any customary acts that help move the deal to closing or the conclusion of it. honesty and good faith, meaning again that we're going to work with every party always and no misleading spaces. So that's part of the space that we're going to work through. We're not concealing our role. There's no false promises in the role. There is nothing else that's going on in that space where we want to make sure that we're talking through what that is. And lastly, same type of material fact disclosure, right? Anything that's actually known to you, right? So not secondhand. We're talking about what do you know, whether it's about the title, physical condition, any defects. You do not have a duty or an obligation to discover them, right? You only have a duty to disclose the material facts. And again, we always say anything that could adversely affect a normal purchaser's use and enjoyment of a property. So when we talk about, the neighbor comes over and says, hey, there's water in the basement all the time from the Red River, right? That goes right into that thing. And you go to your client who maybe is the seller and we say, hey, do you guys have this, a customer, if we were told, the neighbor told us as we were here for the inspection that you guys get water, they say no. You don't even have a duty to go any further to discover it. You've figured it out. You heard. You were given an authoritative position. So it's a little bit of a weird space, but those are there. So what's important to also know in Minnesota and North Dakota, what's really different is the fact that we don't have this confidentiality piece that stays in place. So what is not owed to a customer is the loyalty, the obedience, full agency disclosure, right? Confidentiality, not owed, which is a key trigger, by the way. And agent level reasonable care and diligence with the accounting, right? So we don't owe them anything inside of that space. We just owe them, here are normal roles and responsibilities that we would do to move the thing through. It could be a showing, could be, sending documents off, whatever you would deem would be customary. And then again, we're dealing honestly and in good faith as our code of ethics would dictate, and then material fact disclosure. And that's a little bit of a difference because that confidentiality piece between Minnesota and North Dakota can be a really unique spot to showcase where we are and what we're doing. So just a little bit for you on that side of it. Now, the paperwork, whether it did or did not happen. So this is what does matter. So written agency is an important role, specifically with the new representation laws and the lawsuit changes that have come down. It's one of those areas that we want to make sure we're really, really clear on. So you want to sign before you serve. Paperwork first, services second. If you are in our Minnesota training, you'll know that that's apparently one of my new phrases that I'm loving, is that we talk about paperwork first, services second, and that rings true here just as well. So we want to make sure that written non-agency disclosure, it's signed by the customer before any services come into play. This is an actual form, statutory 70-02-03-15.2. We'll talk specifically about the limited duties and what that difference between a represented client's interests come first, and they always will, before an unrepresented customer or a non-agency customer. Big difference. You want to know your rules. This is the same actually in Minnesota, right? 1 to 4 family residential units. You talk about ag, commercial, 5+ units commercial standards, non-agency disclosure happens for all customer transactions. So no matter how you are going to deal with somebody in a non-agency way, that needs to be disclosed regardless of the transaction. In Minnesota, it's only 1 to 4 residential units, okay? So we have different rules and different vibes, which is not a huge deal by any stretch. It's just different, right? But it is, so in North Dakota, it's almost easier because you just know you're always going to disclose in the event that you're working in a non-agency customer relationship. So there is a new disclosure. Again, it's important to say that, we always have that oral disclosure first, and then we get that signature as far as when it's practical. I think there's actually arguments to be made with digital signatures and all the tools we have that says there's no reason you shouldn't get a signature on this. If somebody refuses, then we just recommend that you write, refuse to sign, had a phone call on this date, put it in their file, and call it a day. But you want to get that disclosure to them as quickly as you can. And then lastly, you want to start looking at write the offer when asked. A customer asking you to write up their offer at their terms is exercising a right, and they're not asking you for a favor. Okay, so reduce it to writing and submit it. It's just that simple. Again, there's no advocacy, there's no advising, there's no counsel in this space. That phrase we talked about previously is the I would statement. And the moment we start talking about, well, I would consider this and I suggest you do this, that's when you got to hit the pause and recognize that you're no longer in a non-agency customer relationship. You have transitioned yourself into an agency relationship without the authority from the consumer or the customer to do so. So you want to respect where they were and also respect yourself. And that comes down to understanding your compensation and what you're worth and what your services are so that you're not just giving away things for free. Now, I want to make sure you're very, very clear on this. If you, in the state of North Dakota, if you're not able to be very, very specific on your on your disclosure, sorry, that's what I'm trying to say here. If you can't be very specific on your disclosure, then you are going to start to work inside of the space that is basically putting you in a position to not get your compensation. Okay, so if you can't document when you actually disclose to somebody, hey, just so we're in a clear space here, we are in a non-agency customer relationship, I want you to be aware of the rights, then you can start to say, hey, if you can't prove that, you getting your fee out of anything is kind of the immediate stopgap in North Dakota subsection 15.1. And it's in paragraph 8, by the way, sorry. So all of that comes into that play there, which is incredibly important. So you just want to be really clear, right? That disclosure matters. You want to have it documented. You want it in the file in the event that you're going to serve somebody in a non-agency way. All right, let's move forward a little bit here. Hopefully the background, this is kind of fun. I just found like this new feature here, which is kind of nifty-glifty. But anyway, the sentiment here, when we start talking about information versus advice, right? So the big thing we always say is, are you stating a fact or are you giving them decision? The phrasing that I've been sharing with you is the I would, right? So in this non-agency position, you are able to drop facts such as the listing price is $425,000. The seller's disclosure notes prior water intrusion. The inspection deadline, as outlined in paragraph 12, is July 15th. Comp sales show 390 to 430,000. The seller counted at 365,000. What would you like to do? These are all factual statements versus you should offer 410. The seller will probably take around 400,000. You don't need an inspection. Waive the appraisal, make it stronger. Put the escalation clause in there. Counter at 357,500. That's where the seller will land ultimately. These are all opinions, they are not facts. And that is the big play that you start to basically have to deal with when you start working through this situation. So again, information versus advice, that's the test when we're trying to transition from one relationship to another and making sure you're as clear as you can possibly be. Okay? All right, so there's no secrets on the North Dakota side. You don't get the opportunity to do that. You always have to come from the space of saying, hey, I don't represent you and our conversation is not confidential. Please don't share information you wouldn't want communicated with the party I represent. Okay? Before anybody starts talking, it's kind of an important spot. Now, again, you could use the adage like somebody calls you and says, hey, I'm just looking for information on this listing you have. That's totally fine. You can give facts. So when we start talking about opinions, then again, you're changing roles. You want to make sure you get that disclosure in place right away. And again, it's as simple as, I'm so sorry. I just want you to be clear. I don't represent you in this, and our conversation is not confidential. Please don't share with me any information that you wouldn't want communicated to the client I do represent. And it can be that simple, right? It's in the situation when we're representing the other party, we want our client's interest to come first and best, right? That client's duty is our top tier priority, and anybody else's, the customer specifically, is a subordinate duty. It's just not as responsible to us as it is in other ways. When the customer volunteers information, you might need to take that to your consumer, which is a little bit different than the Minnesota side, because Minnesota's saying, hey, fiduciary role, a facilitator role is in that space, and that confidentiality needs to hold true, right? Well, if they start volunteering information like their max price, their motivation, other additional terms, price terms, and motivation, like you start to understand like, oh, there is other issues here that I may need to take to my client. In that same vein, we never disclose our client's confidential information, and we never advise the customer against your client. Like, we're never going to advocate in that way. We still disclose any material facts as required by North Dakota statute. and would never look like the customer's advocate. We never want to position ourselves in a way that the client is wondering, you seem like you're really advocating for this other individual. That's not true. We want to just remove that doubt at any single time that we possibly can. Now, a few things to kind of throw at you here. So we talk about the battle of the border. This is always one of those fun things. So here it is. By statute, yes, Minnesota has a named facilitator relationship. When it comes to North Dakota, you are a non-agent and a customer. It is not a facilitator. So there's a role differential and just in the naming side of it. Fiduciary obligations, the only one you owe in Minnesota is confidentiality. North Dakota, you don't owe them jack diddly, including confidentiality, right? So that component goes out the window. Fact duty, same is true. We owe material fact disclosure. Known adverse facts, I say, is the same thing as no material fact, title, condition, and defects, because a material fact is about anything related to the property, not just condition, but could be title, defects, all those things. Again, anything that can adversely affect a normal normal purchaser's use and enjoyment of the property. Let me get my words right. So paperwork, the Minnesota side, we're going to do our agency disclosure as we do. Then we're going to do our written facilitator services agreement. Then on the North Dakota side, if we want to server, we get to start all over again. And we get to say, here, I need you to sign the non-agency disclosure before any type of a services agreement can be extended. And that's how you begin to move through that. The priority rule, Minnesota side, we convert to agents on in-house represented deals. Okay, so we revert to an agency relationship inside that space. In North Dakota, we say the represented clients' interests always come first. Okay. Compensation-wise, either party can pay per any written agreement in Minnesota. And in North Dakota, you can only get paid by a client. You cannot be compensated by somebody who is not under an agreement. So if they are in a non-agent agency role, then that's where you got to get that disclosure in place in order to make sure that your compensation can actually be transmitted. Again, doesn't really matter what state you're in. Our policy suggests that you should get everybody under a written agreement and just change the scope of the agreement so there's really good clarity. And then you're not, jumping back and forth between, well, I would, and this is the fact, this is the opinion. It gives you the full freedom to honor and value a consumer and into a client relationship so that you can truly advocate for them as best as you possibly can do. And that's what I would really encourage you to try to get all of your people into that space. All right. So in Minnesota, we say, hey, you got options. I can represent you with full fiduciary duties or work with you as a facilitator, whichever is best. I can handle paperwork, logistics, factual information, but I don't advise and negotiate for you, and I do not represent you. So either way, it goes in writing, and it includes how I'm getting paid, and here's the disclosure that explains both of those things. Okay. North Dakota, just so you're aware, our brokerage represents the seller. You'll be treated as a customer, and I can share property information, explain the process, complete forms, transmit your offer, coordinate the deal. But what I cannot do is advise you on price and terms. I can't advocate for you or keep what you tell me confidential, and it may be shared with the seller. In order to proceed, I need you to sign this disclosure first, and you're always welcome to get your own agent or attorney involved at any time, right? So a little bit of a different situation, but at the end, I still feel like it's still showing that a true agency-client relationship is in the better interest of the consumer, and I think it's in the better interest of you. So to me, it's a win-win, and that's how it goes. So here it is, what I want to talk to you really quick about. So one sentence, and you can try to memorize this as easy as you can, okay? In Minnesota, I'm nobody's agents, but I keep your secrets. In North Dakota, I'm nobody's agents, and I don't. Mic drop, boom, out, okay? So in Minnesota, if I'm nobody's agent, but I got to keep your secrets. In North Dakota, I'm nobody's agent, and I'm going to spill the tea. Which somebody once told me, they said, what good are secrets if you can't share them? And while I laughed about it, I thought, there's some truth to that, I think, at the end of the day. So now remember here, just add the label rule. Regulators judge conduct, agreements, and disclosures, not what you call yourself. Okay, so that implied agency is a big deal. Again, I'm just a facilitator. It's not a defense in either state. Your roles and your responsibilities and how you act matters. So try to remember the beautiful old adage, okay? We are going to do paperwork first, services second. And that's the order in which we're going to try to do things today. I appreciate you all. If you got any questions, feel free to give me a call, and we can have a conversation about what that situation looks like. Again, at Crown, we're always going to fight and advocate for you to get a full representation agreement. It's in the best interest of the consumer, and it's in the best interest of you, and keeping that value that you bring to the transaction at the forefront and properly compensated for such. I want to say thank you all for tuning in today. Hope you learned something, and I hope you have a great time impacting lives through real estate.